Hi, I'm Richard Lim, CEO of Retail Economics. I'm delighted to be able to share with you some of the latest insights from our research on the outlook for 2021 for the sector. Needless to say, that is no easy task given the seismic changes that are sweeping through the industry right now. The impact of the pandemic has uprooted people's everyday lives and brought enormous change in the way that we live, work, communicate and shop. The shock to societal norms has forced many consumers to seek different customer journeys, as store closures and restrictions on people's movements has fundamentally impacted our shopping habits. Many of the themes that defined 2020 will continue to resonate in the short term. The UK economy has emerged in 2021 against a backdrop of another national lockdown, and this will cast further doubt over the survival of many viable retail businesses. It's already become clear that the high street will take on a very different form as the impact of the pandemic recedes. We've already seen retailers like the Arcadia Group, Debenhams, Peacocks, Edinburgh Woolen Mill, Bon Marché, and many others fall into administration. And the unfortunate reality is that many others will follow. This will likely mean fewer shops across our high streets and the purpose of stores changing rapidly. But it's far from all doom and gloom. Many retailers are thriving in this new digital-first environment. There has been a step change in the proportion of sales that have moved online. Retailers who have invested heavily in their online operations over the last decade are well positioned to capitalise on these new trends, grasp opportunities in new markets, retain loyal customers and win new ones as consumers seek alternatives that meet a new set of expectations. And customer expectations are higher than ever before. Technology giants like Amazon, Deliveroo, Uber, Netflix have altered the paradigms of what's possible in the frictionless delivery of goods and services. Shoppers expect to seamlessly transition from physical and digital channels, often at the same time, completely rewiring the customer journey across each and every stage. The pandemic has only accelerated these trends. Ultimately, 2021 will be engulfed in further disruption, and although we're living through a vortex of digital change, businesses that adapt, innovate and embrace change will be the ones that thrive. So against this backdrop, I've picked out 3 of the top trends that I feel are going to reshape the sector as we gaze into the future. The first trend is about the changing face of consumers in 2021. And put really simply, the strength of consumer spending in 2021 is based on 2 main factors. Firstly, how the impact of the pandemic continues to influence our buying behaviour, and secondly, how the economic shock has impacted personal finances and how this is going to influence our willingness to spend. At the start of this year, we conducted a comprehensive piece of research of over 2,000 nationally representative households to assess exactly how these trends are likely to play out this year. Our research creates consumer segments and then quantifies households into a behavioural change quadrant. Firstly, we consider the backdrop for behavioural change. And as the way that we live, work, communicate and shop is reshaped by the impact of the pandemic, the evolving customer journey will reflect the path of least resistance for consumers to reach products. Households will continually reorder their priorities and reconcile the impact that the crisis has had on their lifestyles, well-being and personal finances. 4 distinct consumer behaviours will emerge, and we've termed these unfazed, reverters, part shifters and fundamentals. Firstly, are unfazed. And these comprise of those consumers who have been completely unaffected by the impact of the pandemic. Our research shows that this group represents about 1/3 of consumers who suggest that their spending habits remain unaffected by the impact of the pandemic. The second group we called reverters. It means that their spending habits have been impacted, but consumers expect to revert back to pre-COVID-19 behaviours once the threat of the virus recedes. It accounted for about 1/4 of all consumers. The third group we called part shifters. This group suggests that spending has changed permanently across some parts of their spending. They represent just under 1 in 5 who suggest that the impact of the virus will have a permanent change in their shopping habits across some categories. Finally, the fourth group we called fundamentals, and it's where consumer spending will change on a permanent basis across the majority of their spending. This group represented just under 1 in 5 consumers. These shifts in behaviour, unfazed, reverters, part shifters and fundamentals will be set against consumer expectations about personal finances and their willingness to spend. This is where a further 4 behavioural segments emerge: confident, undeterred, cautious and hibernators. The first group, confident consumers, are those where spending levels are actually expected to rise. These consumers make up just 8% of households who intend to spend more in 2021 than the previous year. They are typically higher earner, older consumers, but crucially, they are much more confident that their lives will return to some semblance of normality sooner than other consumer segments. The second group we called undeterred, where their spending levels have remained largely unaffected by the impact of the virus. This group of consumers make up the largest proportion, showing that the prevailing customer instinct is to keep calm and carry on, undeterred in their spending. These are typically older consumers, more affluent, and who have better job security and the ability to work from home. Some of these consumers have actually seen a boost in their discretionary spending because they've cancelled holidays, they've had fewer evenings out socialising, and they're commuting less to work. As such, their propensity to spend remains largely unaffected. The third group we called cautious, and these are consumers that are looking to cut back their discretionary spending. This group makes up about 1/3 of all consumers, and they're mainly comprised of younger consumers who are less affluent than the average household. And the final and fourth group we called hibernators, and these are consumers looking to cut back on all non-essential purchases. They comprise just over 1 in 8 consumers, and they are looking to hibernate and wait for more certain times to arise. These consumers are likely to be made up of lower income households and typically be aged between 35 and 55. So what we've done is we've combined the first 4 groups that look at behavioural change with the second 4 groups that look at how they've been impacted by the economic shock to create a behavioural change quadrant. The impact of these behavioural change groups will be felt unevenly across the industry, depending on a business's core objectives, attitudes to risk, region, and many other factors. What's more, changes throughout 2021 will involve a series of complex societal shifts based on public policy, experiences, and emotion. We're in the midst of a shakeout across the retail sector as consumers migrate towards business models that are aligned to a new set of customer values and expectations. Businesses who fail to pivot their business models fast enough will be replaced by those with nimble strategies and new entrants. But the pace of change will make for a painful period of adjustment. I know from speaking to many retail businesses that it's important to tackle the legacy of heavy fixed store-based costs in order to become more agile as the influence of digital technologies is amplified by the impact of the pandemic. Retailers will need to address the burden of rent and other occupancy costs in order to support a footprint for a digital future. Those that emerge on the other side of this crisis will be stronger and more adaptable to the challenges that lie ahead from the key themes that retailers must embrace as a new consumer paradigm emerges. Our second trend that we identified was the perceptions of the long-term impact of COVID-19. And what our research showed was a strong relationship between consumers' perceptions about the threat and the duration of the virus and the desire to cut back on discretionary levels of spending. What our research showed is almost 2 in 5 consumers think that their lives will return to normal by June this year. That rises to 55% by September and 65% by December. But it leaves over 1/3 of consumers that believe it's going to take more than a year for their lives to return to normal. And actually 16% believe that things will never return back to normal. What we found is that consumers who believe it's going to take longer than 12 months for their lives to return back to normal are significantly more likely to cut back on discretionary spending. Younger groups of consumers appear more pessimistic both about the duration of the impact of the virus and their willingness to spend. Of course, there are many other factors too to consider, such as high youth unemployment rates, the effectiveness of the vaccine, and the impact on the wider economy. Perceptions about the duration of the impact of the virus is also critical because it influences our attitudes towards saving too. Many households have boosted their savings because they've had to cancel holidays, they're commuting less frequently, and they're also having fewer evenings out. The Bank of England estimate that households in the UK are holding on to over £100 billion worth of additional savings. Our analysis shows that more than half of households' expenditure has been impacted by the effect of the pandemic. However, what this does is mask a significant divergence by household income. And actually, the least affluent households have about 40% of their spending that is delayable. So things like clothing, recreation and culture, and also work-related expenses as well. This proportion rises to 65% for the households in the highest 10% of earnings, and it equates to about £2,900 per month. Even for the average household, it equates to about £1,250 per month, and it's a significant annual saving of about £15,000 a year. Households' propensity to spend will in part be driven by perceptions around the duration of the virus. The third trend is about the seismic shift towards online. And during the lockdown, consumers were faced with entirely new customer journeys. They were ordering products online that they had previously only ever purchased in store. And actually, our research showed that almost half of consumers completed a new online purchase that they had previously only ever purchased in store. It's a new wave of online shoppers that has broken through those initial barriers of setting up online accounts, entering payment details, and even overcoming issues of trust. See, the question that many retailers are asking us is whether these behaviours will become permanent or whether consumers will revert to previous purchasing habits once the impact of the virus recedes. In reality, the readjustment of spending habits will be diverse. It will differ by different customer groups across different products, and that's been outlined by our behavioural change quadrant. Our research shows that just under a third of consumers believe that their shopping habits will change on a permanent basis as a direct impact of COVID-19, and this proportion rises to about 40% for those aged between 45 and 54. There is also a positive correlation with income too, with wealthier households displaying a greater propensity for permanent change. We also found a strong positive correlation between those that felt that the impact on their shopping habits will be permanent and those that also believed that they would spend a high proportion of their spending online as well, even after the impact of the pandemic recedes. Overall, we forecast that the proportion of online sales will reach 28% in 2020. Based on the trajectory of growth in previous years, what we've seen is an acceleration in online of about 5 years in just 1 year. But considerable uncertainty remains over the ongoing impact of the pandemic, the effectiveness of the vaccine, and future government measures to try to control the spread. Throughout 2021, further disruption should be expected, but consumers will be much better prepared. They will lean on previously learnt behaviours more effortlessly and switch to lockdown buying habits. While for many this will mean a greater proportion of their spending will be conducted online, consumers have also altered their distribution of spending across physical channels too. A greater shift towards retail parks that offer the convenience of free parking, larger spaces for more effective social distancing, and open air environments have proved to provide greater levels of confidence for consumers. Meanwhile, working from home has also encouraged more localised shopping, which has supported local businesses too. Overall, the transition to lockdown shopping behaviour will become more frictionless for consumers. So in conclusion, as we look forward into 2021, retailers have a host of challenges and opportunities to navigate. Permanent changes within the retail sector are likely to arise from an event of this nature and magnitude for retailers as well as consumers. However, these changes will be felt unevenly across different parts of the market as a new normal emerges. Influencing factors such as policy implementation, retail categories, consumer type, culture, geography, and many other factors will be at play. Each retailer faces its own unique set of challenges as the industry transitions towards a post-COVID-19 era. The greatest impact will be the seismic shift towards online, and many consumers have been effectively forced to engage in a more digital customer journey to receive essentials. For many consumers, online fulfillment has reduced their exposure to the virus and has influenced new behaviours which are likely to endure into the future and beyond the crisis. For retailers and brands, significant industry restructuring will continue relentlessly, accelerated by the pandemic. Here, businesses will pass through different phases which will include aspects of survival, consolidation, and innovation. As we head towards this totally new retail paradigm, successful retailers will be those that can identify and secure new customers. They will be those that can leverage those permanent shifts in consumer behaviour, fill gaps as market opportunities arise, repurpose stores to meet new customer expectations, and operate with new resilient supply chains. Whether the COVID-19 pandemic recedes in the immediate future or lasts throughout 2021 and beyond, the fallout from the event will cause permanent shifts in consumer behaviour and leave a legacy of change throughout the industry. Thank you so much for listening to our top 3 trends. If you've got any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thanks again.